say a quick prayer, and then we'll let Don get started. God, we, first of all, are thankful for people like Don who are an advocate for children in the community. God, we ask that you just allow us to hear, open our hearts and our ears so we can just be knowledgeable about this and be prepared. God, we ask right now for safety in our building and in our community. God, we ask for your hand over all the things that we do, but God, we know that stuff happens and this world is dark. And so we ask for just good, just help us to hear everything you want us to hear this morning. God, be with Don as he educates us and helps us to hear and see the reality of what's going on in the world. God, we love you. We're thankful for Jesus, for he rescued us. Help us to live like people who have been rescued. In his name we pray. Amen.
Well, I'm Don Mosley. I'm the Executive Director of Ralston House. And before we get started, I always like to just give a couple of caveats. One, all we're going to talk about mainly today is child sex abuse. It's not a fun topic. I'm not going to try to gross you out. I'm not going to try to tell you anything horror stories, but the subject itself is disturbing. So if something disturbs you, you need to leave the room. That's not going to upset me. It's going to be fine. The other part is, I always tell people I have 5 kids. I let them go to school, church, Sunday school. They got to play outside. I am not saying put your kids in a bubble and never let them out. Although you may feel like that after you hear this. They need other adults in their life. They need to be exposed to a lot of good things in the community. And so certainly if that's the message you get, you've taken away I've not done things correctly. Well, with that though, I want to talk about a little bit about Ralston House and why we do these presentations and who we are. We're the Child Advocacy Center for the 1st and 17th Judicial Districts, which is Jefferson and Gilpin counties, Adams and Brookfield counties. We're a nonprofit. We're not a government agency. We're the only nonprofit that serves those areas in the way we serve them. And what we do is when there's an outcry of sexual abuse, which is about 70% of our cases of children, severe physical abuse or long-term torture of a child, about 15% of our cases, or a child has witnessed a violent crime, the death of a sibling at the hands of a caretaker or someone else, an adult homicide, domestic violence, SWAT team goes into a home and there's a child in it, they'll have us interview those. Any crime violent crime a child might witness, police or social services or the DAs, instead of bringing those kids to the police station, social services, or prosecutor's office, they bring them to Ralston House. And we provide them with 3 services. And we don't charge either the families or law enforcement, human services, or prosecutors for any of our services. 3 services we provide primarily are 1, forensic interviewing. We have specially trained interviewers who interview these kids. Police, social services, and a prosecutor watch from a separate room. It's all recorded onto a DVD, so they can watch that over and over again so they don't have to keep re-interviewing the child. If it goes to court, both prosecuting attorney and defense attorney are going to get that. And that's sort of one of the things that makes forensic interviewing very specialized. They have to make sure they haven't led that child in any way, put any ideas in their head, done anything like that, and they have to make sure the child is not traumatized. Our ethics say if the child, we're there to serve the kids, not law enforcement. So if at any point we feel like we're traumatizing the child, we end the interview. It seldom ever happens. We're not allowed to bring up anything about the crime. So a child may have been hurt 6 months ago, and our interview will usually start with, tell me what you had for breakfast this morning. In some way, with their talents, they get these kids to talk about their worst days. And in great detail, sight, smell, sound, touch, taste, texture, anything they can get, because that's what law enforcement and human services are going to use to investigate these cases. I always say if I make a mistake as executive director, I push, delete on my computer and retype what I was working on. If an interviewer asks uses one word that they shouldn't have used, ask a question wrong, then they've got to explain that in front of a jury for about 2 hours with a defense counsel saying, what research did you base that question on? Why did you choose that word over this word? They have to justify all that. So it's a very intense sort of process, and it's all done in the open in the sense that defense gets to watch the same questions as prosecution. We provide pediatric sex assault examinations. We're the only facility besides Denver Health and Hospital and Children's Hospital that does that. Most people say we do those for evidence. We will find evidence in less than 10% of our cases. And in fact, if our doctor finds evidence in more than 10%, we have to have all her files rechecked by outside professionals. Because most of the kids will not tell for a year, 6 months, 2 years. And so we're not likely to find evidence. When we find evidence, great. That works out well for us. But it's very seldom we're going to find evidence. The main reason we do them is to make sure these kids are physically okay. We're going to do a full pediatric exam. We're going to look in their ears, listen to their heart, do all those things, but we're going to take lots of pictures of their genital area with a special machine. It is not an invasive exam unless you're a girl who's had your first menstrual period, in which case we will do a full speculum exam. Here's the amazing thing about our doctor and our exams. All the kids are given surveys on, was it comfortable? Did it hurt? And almost every kid, including those teenage girls, said the exam didn't hurt and it was comfortable, believe it or not. The exam takes about 15 minutes, we give 2 hours is the appointment block. Because we are in no hurry, and we go as fast or slow as that child tells us to go. And at any point, any child can tell us no. And we will stop the exam. Again, it doesn't happen much because our doctor is great at how to do these exams and making kids comfortable. It is not traumatic, which is sort of what you see on TV shows. In fact, we have kids walk out of the exam room, their siblings upstairs going to be examined, they say, you're next, and it's really fun, believe it or not. So we're going to do it to make sure they're physically okay. If their parent has been their perpetrator, they probably not got to go to a doctor because doctors ask too many questions. Do you know about keeping your body safe? Things like that. Perpetrators don't want those questions asked. So we found everything from worms to scoliosis to strep on kids who have come through our facility because they get their vaccinations for school at Walmart clinics or the health center or for sports physicals, but they don't go get those full physical exams. So we're going to make sure they're healthy. We're going to test for sexually transmitted diseases because teens are scared to death they have one. But they can't go to their own doctor or even Planned Parenthood, someplace like that, because all those places are going to say, who was your partner? And they don't want to say it was my coach. They don't want to say it's my uncle. And so they sit and worry. What do I have? Younger kids, we test because nobody thinks when a 4-year-old's sick that they've got chlamydia or gonorrhea. We're going to make sure that they're physically okay. We're going to test teen girls for pregnancy because a lot of them worry about that. And we can do that all right in the office. We pay for the lab work. It costs the family nothing. So we're going to make sure they're physically okay. But the other thing our medicals really do a lot is their mental health, both for the parents and for the kids. Because both parents and kids believe they're broken when they're sexually assaulted. They think they're not going to heal. We hear questions from both kids and parents. Will she be able to have children? Will they ever enjoy sex? Will it make them gay or straight? Can they go to the bathroom right? Will they be able to graduate college? Will they ever be able to get married? And we can say yes to all of them. We can say they can get married, they can enjoy sex, they can have kids. We almost never see injuries. Out of the last, I think, 1,500, we've not seen one long-term injury of a kid. Because these are not the guys who grab kids, we'll talk about those, who grab kids off the street. These guys reuse kids. And so they don't want to send a kid home beaten up and bloody because a parent would ask a question about that. So we don't see physical injuries generally from these assaults, and so we can reassure families that they're going to be okay. The other thing is kids get weird ideas about their bodies. The examples we use are two. One, we had a 9-year-old girl come in who played competitive soccer, and she told the doctor she had been pregnant for the last 11 months. She could feel the baby in her stomach, and she was concerned it was going to fall out on the soccer field. What our doctor can tell her that a social worker like me can't is, one, I'm a doctor, I know these things, you can't get pregnant at 9. 2, we're going to do a pregnancy test. Look, didn't turn blue. And 3, you have an amazing brain. Because when you didn't tell anyone what was happening to you, your brain had to make you think of some way to make you tell. And it made you think you were pregnant. And that doesn't mean you're crazy. That means your body's taking care of it. And you should be very proud of it. She walks out a different person. We had another girl who came in who was molested pre-puberty, came in afterwards for a physical exam. And she said, before I take off my clothes, you need to know he did horrible things to me, and I am deformed. I am completely gross and deformed. I don't want you to be shocked. Doctor said, I've seen thousands of kids and adults. There's nothing you can show me that will gross me out. When she takes off her clothes, she's a completely normal 14-year-old girl. But she had developed. She had grown breasts. Her vaginal area had changed. She'd grown hair. She thought that was a result of her perpetration. What our doctor could do is show her pictures and say, this is what normal girls look like. That's what you look like. I've seen thousands of kids. You're a beautiful girl. You have nothing to worry about. She walks out of there a different kid. Not because we've done some great medical thing, just because we've reminded her of who she is and been able to explain that to her. So that's why we do our medicals. We do victim advocacy. We have one victim advocate who works with the kid while they're there and one who works with the parents. And when I talk about the parents, I'm assuming there's a non-offending parent. Offending parents would not be allowed in the facility. So we're going to make sure those kids are comfortable before the interview. We're not going to talk to them about anything they're going to talk about in the interview. We're going to get them to play with toys. Our places are located in little houses. There's snacks. There's every kind of toy you can imagine. We're going to get them to eat a snack. We're going to relax them. For teens, we're going to try to get them to talk about anything. School, just try to get them to relax and get used to talking before they go in. When they come out of that interview, we're going to make sure they're okay, that they haven't been traumatized. We're going to help them wind down, because a lot of them are going to come in the morning, go back to school that afternoon after talking about something very traumatic. So we're going to make sure they're okay. The bulk of the work, though, our staff would say is with the parents. Because I know as a parent, if your child's hurt, whether it's your fault or not, you feel guilty. Your child falls down, breaks their arm, you think, should I have done something different? Should I have let them go play? And so we work with the parents to help them figure out what to do next. They're wondering, is the guy going to be arrested today? Is he going to jail tomorrow? Or are we going to, go to court in a week or two? And we got to say, whoa, one, it won't go to, if it goes to court, it won't go for 1.5 years. It's a legal system, not a justice system. Your child may never find justice. And you will have no control of that system. But let's talk about what you can control. You can control how you react to your child. You can control how you and your family stay healthy. We will get them into therapy, which is paid for by victims' compensation. Whether you make $0 a year or $10 million a year, you are eligible for victims' compensation. It's a fund paid in from criminal fees. And it will pay for therapy. We've had kids on it for 2 years. It will also pay for family therapy. So we're going to make sure they get into the right therapist. We're going to help them prepare for what their child might react to as they go through this process. We're going to help them figure out hard answers to questions. What do I tell my mom when I have to tell her my brother's been having sex with my daughter? How do I break that to my family? What do we say to everyone at school who said this is the greatest football coach of all time? Not so great to my son. We'll help them figure that out. We'll follow them through the court process if necessary. Usually we have them working with victim advocates from the district attorney's office, but if they want us, then we'll be the ones who follow with them. That's what we generally do at Ralston House. We also train police and social services and DAs. This year I think we put on about 11 trainings on everything from how to identify head injuries to perpetrator patterns to case studies to how trauma affects kids and adults. And then we do these prevention presentations because we want to slow our front doors down. This year we'll see 1,200 kids. We need to see less. And the way we do that is get adults to protect kids. The other populations we do see, the majority by far are kids between ages 2 and 18 for interviews, because interviewing even a 2-year-old, as you know, would be very hard. All parents say their kids are verbal at 2. They're verbal to them, but not to the rest of us in general. And we'll do medical exams 0 to 18. We also interview developmentally disabled adults, maybe somebody who's 40 or 50, who's operating on a 3rd or 4th grade level. We are doing elderly victims of financial crimes and physical crimes, 70 and above, because many times they have the same trauma reactions because the crimes are similar. It's usually by somebody they trusted. They feel embarrassed. I was an accountant and now I let somebody steal all my money. And often they get nervous around talking to police directly. And in some cases you can have some diminished capacity due to Alzheimer's or dementia. We are on the trafficking team for Jeffco and Adams County. Last year we interviewed 40 boys and girls who are being prostituted here in Jeffco. It's a DA, a caseworker, an investigator, and our forensic interviewer work on that team with the FBI to do those kind of cases. And then we do some adult women who have been raped because they are too traumatized to go into a police station, and our techniques tend to work better with them. So that's what we do at Ralston House. So today, we're going to talk about sex abuse, and this is as gross as I'll get today. But you have to understand what sex abuse is before we can talk about it. Most people think this, penetration. And I'm here to say it's all those things, and what we use, and law enforcement uses as a definition, is the bottom thing. Anything an adult or older kid does to a younger kid for their sexual gratification. And there is no sexual act, no matter how bizarre, whatever, you heard something on the internet or saw something on a TV show about some bizarre act, there is no act you could tell me that we have not had a child describe to us. And don't make the mistake of thinking there's some hierarchy. This is the worst, this is a little less bad, you know, being exposed to pornography is not so bad. They're all bad, and the only person who gets to decide how bad is the victim. If somebody I've met 2 or 3 times penetrates me, it may not be near as traumatic as that coach who worked with me for the last 2 years, told me he's going to help get me a Division I scholarship, and then fondled me because of the trust that was broken. Or the 16-year-old girl who after her interview told us, I'm raped every night. And all that had happened to her was she had naked pictures of her posted on the internet. That's all. And she said, I'm raped every night because I know what guys are doing to my pictures. And when I get married, I will be raped. And when I have kids, I will be raped. And someday, somebody may send those pictures to my family or kids. Don't tell her, oh, you were lucky, you weren't penetrated. It's all bad, and only they get to decide how bad. If you remember nothing else, remember this. It happens, and it happens often, because perpetrators tell us, and I'll talk a lot about what perpetrators think. A lot of our research comes from one huge study of about 2,000 imprisoned perpetrators who answered questions for us. They say they count on you believing it seldom happens, because then you won't see the signs when it's right under your nose. And this is their excuses. Don't buy them. It's never accidental. It's almost always planned, and it is always harmful. Don't let someone tell you it didn't really hurt them. It just happened. You don't wake up one day and say, I'm having sex with a 7-year-old. It is, and you'll be amazed at how much planned. I will say there are times they act impulsively, and that's often when we catch them, because they are such good planners. It's when they act impulsively we catch them. But don't think it hasn't been planned. So how prevalent? The one most agencies use right now is this 1 in 4, 1 in 6. And what they mean by that is 1 in 4 girls won't make it to age 18 without being molested. 1 in 6 boys. And 10 years ago, I believe that was true. All the studies were showing that. New studies, and these are all numbers from different studies, but new studies are placing it about here. This number keeps coming up the most. 1 in 6, 1 in 12. This is a thing we have impacted. And the studies are showing the reason we've reduced the rates is because adults are reporting more, people are willing to talk about it more, police are investigating better, and advocacy centers like Ralston House have helped with investigations. This is a problem we can do something about. I'm not saying that's good. That's still 2 or 3 girls for every soccer team, 1 or 2 boys for every football team, if you picture it that way. But this is one we can make a difference, because if we talk about it, kids will report, and if adults report, we can investigate and get kids safe. And we can take perpetrators off the street, and you'll see what that means. So how prevalent? It's always hard. The reason we have so many studies is when we do anonymous studies, 30% of the people who do anonymous studies say, I plan to go to the grave with this. I will never tell anybody. And most kids do not report, 2/3 of kids do not report until they're over 18. So it's not one they want to talk about. And males in particular don't want to report. Because one, we're supposed to be macho and fight things off even if we're 5 years old. In fact, treatment providers for male victims who are adults, they often have them bring a picture of themselves at the age they were molested to remind them, do you really think this 7-year-old could have kept that coach, could have kept this man? Because we picture ourselves at our whatever age we're at, and think we should have done something. And then there's the whole stigma of homosexuality. What if people think that about me? So males are much more likely not to report. And most kids don't come home from school and say, guess what happened at soccer today, Mom? People find out accidentally. That's how we find out. Somebody walks in on something, sees a text message, they tell a friend. A kid acts out sexually on a toy, and somebody thinks, what's going on? But this is not a crime kids just come out and talk about, or they're very tentative. This is the one that surprises most people. And this study has been replicated over and over, both in the US and Europe. 1% of all outcries by kids are false. And a lot of agencies who have us in to protect their staff from false outcries. And I think that's a great thing. Whatever reason you get us in is good. And it would be horrible to have a false outcry. But understand, that's 1%. What you don't hear about is this. 20% of victims where the perpetrators confessed and we have physical evidence that that child was assaulted, 20% of those kids will say, not me. Nope, he's lying. That's not me in that picture. It must be my twin. Somebody else. They're 20 times more likely to lie that it happened to them than to make it up. 4 to 8%, depending which study you look at, where a parent has reported something is false. Maybe my wife and we got a divorce, I don't like her new husband, so I say, I think he's doing something to my kid. So adults may make it up, but this is not a crime kids want to make up. And in fact, they lie the opposite way. Why do you care about it? Why should your church care? Because it changes the way kids grow up. It deprives them of a normal childhood. I'm not going to go through all these, but I'll give you some highlights. More likely to commit or attempt suicide, more likely than a normal, somebody who hasn't been molested. More likely to have long-term mental health problems, from depression to anxiety disorders. More likely to abuse and use drugs and alcohol. More likely to be labeled a delinquent when they're a juvenile. More likely to be violent, convicted of a violent crime as an adult. And now from these studies out of, originally they started in San Diego, called the Adverse Childhood Experience Studies, the ACE studies. 18,000 people participated in the first study, and now they've been replicated in a number of different states. These kids die early. They die 10 to 20 years earlier than somebody who hasn't been traumatized. Not from any physical damage, from the actual thing, but by the way their brain works. They die of things like hypertension, kidney disease, heart disease, all sorts of things that have nothing to do directly with their assault. And even when they factor out smoking, drugs, and alcohol, they still die earlier because trauma changes how kids' brains work. It literally can reconfigure their brain, and it reconfigures their nervous system so that it causes other long-term problems for them. Churches in particular have an extra burden. Because what victims tell us is that those who maintain a good relationship with a church or some spirituality heal better. Therapists will tell you that. They do better in the long run. But if that's broken, then they get a spiritual injury. And many victims will talk about that is one of the worst things that happens to them is their loss of faith in a God. Their loss of a community. They start to view God as unfair, caring, punishing me. If the message we preach is you get what you deserve, then why did this happen to me? If we say all prayers are answered and don't explain that to a young kid who thinks in black and white, and they were praying every night before they went to bed that Dad wouldn't come in tonight, then what did God think of them? I hate myself. I'm dirty. I'm disgusting. How possibly could God love? Am I a virgin? I've heard my church say, we have to be virgins. I didn't want this. So am I a virgin? Our doctor gets asked that question all the time. She can't answer the spiritual side of that question. She can say there's no physical virgin test. You can have a hymen, you cannot have a hymen. Some kids are born with a broken hymen. Some adult women are violently raped and still have a hymen intact. There is no physical test. And what she has to say is, you need to go back to your church and talk to somebody about that. With the hope they'll say the right thing, because often we say things we don't realize when we stress things that, yes, not having premarital sex is great, but we need to talk about choice. If it's not your choice, how are you viewed? Same thing with am I gay? Perpetrators will usually use this against males. Males will get an erection whether they like it or not. It's a physiological reaction, not emotional. And what does that perpetrator say? That means you like it. That means you're gay. You've heard what your church says about gay people. I'm not saying change your doctrine. I'm saying talk to people what it means. Start explaining to kids how do we differentiate from choice and no choice? And what does it mean? You know, the sin versus the sinner. All those kinds of things. Because kids are black and white, and perpetrators know that, and they use it against them. I can't forgive. Christian churches preach you need to forgive your enemies. But what if, when you hear some of the ways kids are tortured, to expect them to forgive is too much. They may get there eventually, but it is a process. And it is one they have to go through. But to be told, you need to forgive now. You need to reconcile yourself. That's a process they need to go through. And if I can't forgive, then I won't be forgiven, and that means I'm going to hell. You can talk about what the process of forgiving is. It doesn't come easy. It doesn't mean the perpetrator doesn't get consequences. It doesn't mean you have to like the person. It doesn't mean you ever have to have them in your life again. Those are whole different things. And so explaining that to somebody, and these come from adults. Kids aren't able to tell us this. As adults, they come back and say, this is what I struggle with. This is why I still don't have a relationship with God. This is why I'm so alone. Why can my staff come to work knowing all that stuff? Because kids who get into Ralston House are the lucky ones. Because every study shows that kids who get support and get therapy get better. I'm not saying it doesn't leave a scar, but they get better. Those results we're talking about actually go away. They don't end up dying early. They don't end up abusing drugs and alcohol. They can get better. That's why my staff, because we feel like we're part of the healing, not just finding something that can't be fixed. I will also mention there are some kids horribly molested from the time they're born till they leave home, never tell anybody, never get therapy, and they do great. They're the outliers. Trauma affects everyone differently, but statistically they're the unusual ones. Same thing you see, somebody goes to fight in Afghanistan, some guys come back with horrible post-traumatic stress, have to be hospitalized, some walk right back in their lives, but the majority are somewhere in that middle where they need to work on it a little bit. That's how it is with this too. So we'll spend some time talking about perpetrators. Kenneth Lanning, the top quote there, was the leading sort of profiler for the FBI before he retired on sexual perpetrators. And he says, we should fear these guys not because they're monsters, but because they're us. You can't tell the difference between them and us. And Abel and Harlow sort of wrote the book on how to treat sex offenders. And they say in almost every outward characteristic, statistically, they look just like the average American population. There are two areas they're different. One is that they're primarily male. There may be, some people are saying female perpetrators could be high as 15% or more. Because what victims tell us is it's more horrific for them to be assaulted by a female. And that makes sense when you think about how our society views males and females. You watch a TV comedy show or something, and they'll portray men as sex-crazed maniacs. And if you're portrayed that way, then you can imagine even a dad maybe doing something to a kid. But how are women portrayed? They're our caretakers. So it becomes almost impossible to picture a mom, a grandmother, a sister, an aunt, them doing something to a child. So when you're assaulted by a woman, if you don't turn around on them, you turn it inside. You say, what's wrong with me that this would happen? And so there may be more, but still the majority are going to be male. 40% of the victims are abused by family members, dad, mom, sister, cousin, brother, uncle. 50% by somebody that family trusted. Teach my child. Show them how to play lacrosse. Tell them about God. Drive them to school. Babysit them. I'm trusting you with them. And they break that trust. This 10% is a national stat. At Ralston House, we only see 1% of strangers. And we're not going to be talking about these guys today. Strangers are the Jessica Ridgway case. These are the guys, they do it for completely different reasons. They do it often to cause pain, torture, those kind of things. They're sociopaths or psychopaths. That is not the case with these other ones, and their motivations are different. So we won't be talking about these. And again, we don't see many of those in Ralston House. This is one a lot of people don't know about. Most perpetrators start when they're teenagers. And we often have great rules for adults, but we forget to put them on for teens. So there was a church here in Jeffco who I read through their rules, and I've witnessed what they do. They had amazing rules to keep their kids safe. They were very concerned about their child's safety. And their rules were perfect, except they didn't know this. So, adults always two adults always around each other. But they had a 15, 16-year-old boy who was taking kids to the bathroom by himself during Sunday school, and he was molesting them in the bathroom. Because the same rules didn't apply to the kids. And they didn't know this. It wasn't that they didn't love and want to protect their kids, they just didn't have that bit of information. So one of the things we say is, anybody who's in charge of kids follows the same rules. It doesn't matter whether they're 10 or if they're 50. You have the same protections in place. So who are perpetrators? You lay out the demographics in the United States: rich, poor, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, makes $10 million a year, makes no money, married, unmarried, gay, straight, any category you can think of, and perpetrators will match our demographics, except, like we said, primarily male, and they attend church more than the rest of us. And that's not because church is bad. You have to look at it from their perspective. I want you to trust me. You don't let people around your kids who you don't trust, and I need to get around your kids. And what better way to be trusted than to go to church? Because you're going to think I'm there for the same reason you are. To build a relationship with God, to be a better person, to be part of a good community. And I'm there to be seen. In fact, perpetrators, that survey of 2,000, 93% of them describe themselves not just as religious, but as very religious. This is what makes them different. They're sexually aroused by children. This is not adult rape. That's done for other reasons. Children are one of their preferred partners. Doesn't mean they won't have sex with a man, a woman, a dog, a cat. But this is one of their preferred partners. And you cannot see it. It's up here. And we want to think we can tell who's who, but you won't know. I always say, you don't know who I'm going home to have sex with tonight. My wife? My kids? You don't know. Because you don't know who I prefer. Because you can't see it. This isn't a quote from a guy who's currently sitting down in Canyon City. He said, my relationship with Kathy was great. We bathed, we drank together, we had sex, she was independent, extensive wardrobe and vocabulary, precocious, brave. I loved her so much. I wish we could have had the relationship without the perversion. Kathy is 6 years old. You don't think like somebody who wants to do this with kids. And so you're not going to be able to get in here. So you won't be able to tell. This is a question, we call it the sad question at Rawls House. After the interview, police, social services, prosecutor, my staff, sit down with the parents in a room and say, here's what we found out. And we get this question from parents. Why? Why would somebody who's taught in Jeffco the last 15 years hurt my baby? Why would a man of God do this to my child? Why would this coach? And perpetrators giggle at this statement. They say, you all don't get it. I became a coach to get access to kids. I drive a school bus instead of RTD to get access to kids. I teach to get access to kids. John Dillinger, the bank robber, said, they asked him, why do you rob banks? Because that's where they keep the money. I'm going to take a position of trust, if I can, and I'm going to take one where I'm near kids. Because I get access, and you don't suspect me. Listen next time you're around people, and something comes on the news about a doctor, or a lawyer, or a teacher, or somebody, and they say he's accused of raping children. The people around you will say, I can't believe a doctor, I can't believe a teacher. Of course you can't. That's why I took those positions. How are they described before they're caught? Nice, charming, likable. We don't see long criminal histories with most of these guys. They might have a minor possession for drinking when they were in college, you know, a traffic ticket here or there. But unless they've been caught for perpetrating, we don't see it. And Galvin de Becker, who we'll talk about a little later, he says, don't confuse niceness with character. Because we all know how to be nice. We're trained from an early age how to be nice to people. And that doesn't define who we are as in character. The grumpy guy down your block, if you park in front of his house or step on his lawn, is out screaming at you, could be the person you could trust with your money, your kids, anything. Because he's got good character. He just chooses to be grumpy. There are two different things. And all of you know how to act nice. There's somebody you work with or see on a daily basis you probably don't like, and you probably don't say, yeah, I hate you today. I'm going to go to my office now. Instead you say, hi, how are you? And you hope to avoid it maybe. But we know how to act nice. And perpetrators know you think nice is good, and they're not the same things, but they're going to act very nice. Why are they so wanting to act nice and be liked? Because they know these things happen. Victims will protect them. Often the victims like these people, and they don't want to see them in jail. They may not like what they're doing to them, but they like them otherwise. Or they know all of you like this person. They've heard all of you say what a great guy he is. And they think, if I tell, I know everybody else likes him, I better not say anything. That parents refuse to believe. Your uncle just loves giving hugs. He doesn't mean anything by it. He's just a handsy guy. What do you mean you don't like being around him? He taught me school. He's a great teacher. So often, because they're so liked, parents don't hear the hints kids are giving. That authorities discount. We've seen police even do this occasionally, who are detectives. They get caught up. They'll say, you know, this guy, I just interviewed him, he's a really nice guy. He teaches on the weekends, he does this, he does that. We're like, really? Perpetrator acting like a nice guy? Oh yeah, I need to relook at this. Community support. We've seen plenty of examples of colleges, churches, everybody supporting somebody. We've seen cases where we have a victim side of the courtroom is empty, and a whole church has shown up on the perpetrator side to support him until the evidence comes out in court, and suddenly nobody's there the next day. But that victim was let alone because the community said, he can't have done this. And finally, we've seen juries acquit. We recently now, I guess it's a little longer ago, had a jury say, we believe this kid, we think they were telling the truth, but I think they must be confused about who did it because this guy's too nice. We heard all those people testify. This is when they interviewed those 2,000 guys in prison. Here's what they said. These are the things that the public believes that helps us get away with our crime. One, they believe public behavior predicts private. And you don't have to read the sports page or the political news to find some politician who acted, or sports star who acted one way in public and had a whole different life behind the scenes. And we are all like that. My wife will tell you, when we go out to eat, I have fairly good manners, but when I'm sitting on the couch watching a football game eating, it's all down the front of me. I'm much worse. We are all grosser at home. We do things at home we never do in public. That's just how we are. Perpetrators know you believe that public image, and they're going to give you the public image you need. We always say, of course, perpetrators aren't the guys in trench coats, you know, drooling, because you'd never let your kids around that person. I'm going to give you a good public behavior look. People are good, and I have 5 kids, and I didn't want them to be as cynical as I've become, so I'd say people are good in general, but not every person is good. And just like anything in life, you have to prepare for those who aren't. Now, you should be polite to others. Perpetrators tell us they use this to get you to bend your rules. Maybe you have a rule here at the church, you're not allowed to meet one-on-one with kids. And I start meeting one-on-one with kids, and you say something to me, and I say, I just took her out in the hall for a minute to talk to her. Are you going to say anything to the supervisor about that? What, you think I'm a bad guy? Give me a break. And then suddenly you feel like you can't tell. Well, it was just a minute. I know, Don. I'm not going to make a big deal of this. I'm going to get you. What do you mean you don't let your kids go camping with anyone but family? I've known your kids for 5 years. You trust me, don't you? You don't think I'm a bad guy. You don't think I'd hurt your kid. And now suddenly I put you in a position where you have to be rude to me and say, I don't know you well enough. Or it's our boundary, and I get to have family boundaries. I get to set those, not somebody else. But I'm going to try to get you to do that. But use that with kids. What your parents tell you to do with adults, you listen to us, you do what we say. I'm going to try to get you to bend. I'm going to get you and your kids to try to bend their boundaries. That people change. And I also believe people change. I've seen perpetrators go, I saw one go in front of a judge and say, put me away for life. I don't want to hurt kids anymore. And I will not manage my behavior outside. I've seen perpetrators go to prison and come out and do everything they need to keep themselves safe. Not be around kids, take polygraphs every 6 months, all the things they're supposed to do. But what they will tell you does not change is their desire to have sex with children. That doesn't leave. And I don't care if it leaves or not, as long as they don't hurt kids. I don't care if somebody has fantasies their whole life about it, as long as they don't act on it. So the person who comes out of prison, who's changed, will come and wants to go to your church. They'll come to your church and say, hi, I just got out of prison for hurting kids. Tell me what service you'd like me to attend. Tell me where you want me to sit. And tell me which two guys you're going to have watching me. And if I ever talk to a kid here, you kick me out and don't let me back in. That is a guy who's trying to change. But the guy who comes out of prison and says, I went to prison for hurting kids. While I was in prison, I met Jesus. Oh, we're best friends now. And I want to make it up to those little kids. I want to start teaching Sunday school. Not change. Because he knows that's not where he should be. Religious persons are honest, good. Christians are good people. I'm sure that's true. And perpetrators count on you to believe that. There was a guy named John Candaria. He was on the Denver Post front page now 10, 11 years ago. He was convicted and put away for basically the rest of his life for hurting kids. When he started hurting kids, he was a practicing Catholic in New Mexico and went to Mass every day. When they caught him here in Denver, he was a Latter-day Saint. And I'm sure he was a Buddhist and a Methodist and an Episcopalian in between. He said, once he was convicted, he said, I went to religious groups because they're suckers. I would show up to church every week and people say, what do you know about John? Good guy. He's at church every week. He helps out. He does this. And there's nothing wrong with that, with believing somebody who's sitting next to me in the pew's good, but understand I may, if I'm a perpetrator, I'm going to tell you to take advantage of it. And so we still have rules, even though there's somebody else around us. Because they know we believe this, and we're likely to trust them. And finally, that you can tell when somebody is lying. I always say, I'm pretty good with my kids. I know their tells. I can tell when they're lying. Beyond that, I'm horrible like everybody else. Anna Salter, one of the leading researchers on perpetrators, took a bunch out of prison to Quantico, Virginia, where the FBI has its training center. Best polygraphers in the world. Their whole job is to tell people are lying. Some of her guys pass their polygraphs. If they can look them in the eye and lie to them while on a poly, they will have no problem saying, I could never hurt your kid. How could you believe that of me? They talk about practicing lying. They watch how you tell the truth, what kind of details you put in, how you move, your arm gestures, your eye contact, and they literally talk about, when you watch their interviews, about practicing it in a mirror. Because they know at some point they're going to get told on, and they want to be able to lie very well. They're very proud of their lying skills. Who is the typical offender? He's male. He begins molesting by age 15. And on average, according to the FBI, he molests 117 kids if they're not caught. And here's the sad part. Most of those kids don't report it. And the even sadder part, the few who do, a lot of the adults choose not to. There's only one way you get away with this crime 117 times. It's that nobody's talking. It's a crime of silence, both for the victim and often for the person the victim tells. If I robbed 117 banks, maybe they haven't caught me, but they'd sure know who I was by then. Why are they so good at it? They talk about practicing months and years ahead of time. They say identify a number of victims. I don't say I want her. I say I'm looking at this side of the room. Which one of you is going to give me something I can take advantage of? Because if I pick her and it doesn't work, I'm empty. But if I work on all five of you, one of you will work out okay. Identify parents. Many perpetrators talk about working on the parents before they ever talk to the kids. Because who gives us access to kids? Parents. And it's amazing to me how quickly this thought comes to them. We had a 15-year-old boy who, once he was in treatment, would talk about what he did. He said, when new families moved into our neighborhood, I would go to, I couldn't wait for it to snow. I'd get up early in the morning and shovel that new family's walk for free, not ask for anything. Trash can blew down the block, I'd pick it up. I'd do anything I could to help that family out, and I'd never pay attention to their kids. Because what every family with kids needs sooner or later is a last-minute babysitter. And I was the good kid on the block. He didn't pay attention to kids, he got parents to trust him. They identify communities to groom. We'll talk more about that in detail, but understand a community can be a church, it can be a sports team, it can be a whole city and state, as an example we'll talk about. And I get them to trust me. Why are they so good at it? When they interviewed those 2,000 guys in prison, they said, when you were out of prison, how much of your day was spent thinking about hurting kids? Over 10 hours a day was their average. Over 10 hours. I have 5 kids. When they were, thank goodness, but when they were in high school, if I spent 15 minutes a day on their safety, I was probably like, you know, they're going out at night, I say, remember who you are, you know, drive careful, don't you be around any drugs or alcohol, get home on time. There's my safety tips. Meanwhile, they've spent 10 hours figuring out how to hurt my kids. It's why they're good at what they do. The one thing you need to remember is it's one person's fault. And perpetrators are great at getting us all to buy into guilt. And because we feel guilt, we don't tell. They get the kids, as you'll find out, they make the kids feel like it's their fault. So they don't tell. Often they get parents to think it's their fault. You shouldn't have let me around your kids so much. If you tell on me, social services will probably come in and take your kids away from you for letting this happen to you. They don't, let me be clear, unless you're participating. But I'll try to get you to feel guilt, and they get communities to feel guilt. Something happens in this church, and if you take on that perpetrator's guilt, you'll think about not reporting. And I don't care how bad your rules are. If you didn't have any protection rules at all, it wouldn't be your fault. It's only the person's fault who raped the child. I don't care what stupid things you do. Only one person made the choice to hurt the child. It's not your fault. You can learn from it. You can get better rules. You can do all those kind of things, but it's not your fault. And they want everyone to feel guilt because guilt makes us not want to talk about it. So don't take on their guilt. Grooming, this is a process that they get both the kid, the parents, and an organization to trust them. And it is worked on by them. They do things to make you trust them. During that, while they're grooming you, they're anticipating at some point that kid may say something. No matter how well I do my job, at some point that kid says something, I'm going to take some preventative measures. Maybe it's I'm going to make myself so worthwhile to the church that even if somebody suspects something, they'll be hesitant. Maybe I'm going to be a big donor. They don't want to lose that money. Maybe I'm going to say, you know, little Teresa in Sunday school class, last week she said you hit her. And I was there and I know you didn't do anything. She seems to lie a lot. You know, little Teresa in Sunday school class, last week she said she saw you taking money out of the communion plate. I told her that's ridiculous. You know, look, and I've spread around that little Teresa's a liar. But nobody puts it together that it was only me saying that. And then 6 months later, little Teresa says, I did something to her. And what do you remember? You all remember how she lied about you too. And suddenly little Teresa's a liar. Now can you really believe her about this? Can you believe she said that about me? I remember that time she said you hit her. I remember that time she said you were stealing money. Man, this kid's got an issue. I've taken a preventative measure so that you won't believe this kid. And finally, I add this, they don't molest every kid they're around, and they will always use that as an excuse. That's one of their preventative measures. They will say, we've seen this on a couple of basketball coaches, they will say, ask any other kid on the team if I've ever done anything to them. Well, no, you didn't. You already had one. You have sex with every person you walk by? No. None of us do. We usually have one partner. That's all they need too. But, and in fact, he may have been extra uncreepy with the other girls. He may have been perfect with them. Because he knows if he's molested one kid, police are going to go ask the other kids. But it proves nothing. Because that's going to be one of my preventative measures. So grooming the community, I use my cheapest example, which is the cross that glows up on the western hill. It's put up by a guy over his father's grave, Mr. Vanderberg. And his daughter, Marilyn Vanderburg, the first Miss America from Colorado, when she was 40 years old, came out, and he had already died. And she said, my dad molested me from the time I was 5 till I went away to see you in college. And what did Denver say? What did the newspaper say? They said she's a liar, she's vindictive, she's a horrible person. This man would never do that. He was wealthy. He had 4 beautiful daughters. His daughter was a Miss America. He put a cross on the hill. He donated to this charity, that charity. There's no way he could do it. She's crazy. Until her older sister said, not so crazy, me too. And I went away to Kansas to get away from him, and he used to come and rent hotel rooms and make me come back. And then other girls in the community who weren't related to them said, not so crazy, us too. But until then, he had groomed all of Denver to believe he could not do this. That's not who he could be. In the Sandusky case, and I've read what victim number 1 told him, and it was horrifying. And the counselor said about Sandusky, he has a heart of gold. He wouldn't do something like that. And I'm telling you, that counselor wasn't a bad person. You have to know who Sandusky was at the time of the first accusation. He was soon, they believed, to be head football coach at Penn State. One of the winningest and cleanest programs in football. He had started the largest anti-child abuse agency in Pennsylvania, and had raised not hundreds of dollars, but hundreds of thousands of dollars for that agency. It was inconceivable he would be the one who would do this. So understand, it doesn't have to be a city, it doesn't have to be a college, it can be a church, it can be a rec center, it can be a sports team, it can be a classroom. But I'm gonna build that trust. They work on the families, like I told you about that 15-year-old. They use charm. Because if I can charm you, you're not going to suspect. And as parents, we often become our worst enemy if our kids don't understand they can come to us with anything. Because we may like this person, because we haven't seen her do anything. So we're always talking about how great a coach he is, or what a great teacher, or this or that. And if we haven't told our kids, I'm always going to believe you first, doesn't mean I'm going to not check on it. But I will always listen to you no matter who it's about, no matter what you tell me. We had a kid who came home from high school here in Jeffco. He said to his mom, I don't like my math teacher. Now his mom could have said, what do you mean you don't like Mr. Adams? He's a great guy, I had him when I was in school. I guarantee that would have ended that conversation. He stuck his toe in the water, that water was cold. I'm not jumping in. But instead his mom said, why don't you like Mr. Adams? Now, he could have said, I don't like Mr. Adams, he gives me homework every night. Great, I'm going to call the principal and tell her to give him a raise. That's what he should do as your math teacher. She hasn't lost a thing by listening to what he had to say. But what her kid said instead was, I don't like Mr. Adams because during quiet time, he comes up and rubs my shoulders and neck. I've asked him to stop, and he says I'll get used to it. That's a whole different message to hear, but we have to be willing to hear it even about people we love and respect and know they could never do it. It never hurts us to listen, to hear what somebody has to say. Here's where they spend most of their time, though, eventually. One, they engage the child in peer-like involvement. They know what kids like in general, and they become almost a peer in some ways with them. There's a joke among perpetrators that says, how often do parents know what their kids like? Twice a year, Christmas and their birthday. How often do we know what they like? Every day of the year. It's what we work on. It's important to us. That guy, John Candaria, who got arrested, the church guy, when Denver went into his home with a warrant, 4 different video game systems, hundreds of video games, every kind of board game, Hot Wheels car, any kind of toy you could imagine he had. Kids like spending time with John. He was fun. Okay, break down a child's resistance to touch. This is why we say you need rules about touching. We forget why adults have sex. It feels good. And it can feel good to a 4-year-old. If I start by just hugging, and eventually I just massage, and I move on and on. And what do we say as parents a lot? Tell me if anyone hurt you. It didn't hurt. Felt fine. Felt like somebody cared about you. So that's why we say you have to have rules about how you're going to touch. They find ways to isolate a child. Obviously, I'm not going to molest a child up here in front of you all, you would tell. But it's more than physical isolation, it's mental isolation. I'm going to try to isolate them from their parents. I may get this kid to try to tell lies with the parents, to break that bond between them and their parents, because if they do, and I'm hurting them, who can they go to if I've broken that bond by getting them to act out against their parents? I'm going to try and maybe not let them have other friends, because if they have no friends and I'm their only friend, they may not like what I'm doing, but I'm the only thing they got. We had a basketball coach who held his practices on the weekend nights, Friday, Saturday nights, during homecoming, prom. He told his girls, if this team is not the most important thing in your life, then get off this team. He had isolated them from their peers. And if the most important thing in my life, that person starts doing something to me, and I'm going to lose all my friends and my team, can I tell? It becomes very, very hard. There are times when they may abuse children in front of other people. The two examples we've seen at Ralston House as a pattern are teachers. Teacher brings a kid up to the front of the class, has them come behind the desk, and they're feeling the child underneath the desk. Child comes home and says, my teacher touched me, my private parts, in front of the whole class. But maybe they don't have the words to say it was behind the desk. Does that sound believable? Let's ask the other kids in the class. Nope, nobody saw anything. And remember, kids don't always have the words we as adults might have, or the details, or they're in shock, and trauma will often make us forget things. The other example we see is vans, and this is one we warn more churches and places that take kids on vans. We usually have one adult in the front, one adult in the very back. One's driving, one's in the back. Person in the back puts the kid who they're molesting in front of them. They have that kid put a blanket or a coat over their lap, and they reach between the seat. And then that kid says, I was molested in the van. You have kids all around you. How is that possible? And don't think they're going to scream or something, because they don't do that until they've got the kid trained. And they're afraid. They threaten violence. Like I said, we don't see injuries. That's not the way, because I can't send a kid home hurt, because you'll ask questions. But they will threaten it. I'll kill you. I'll kill your mom. I'll kill your dad. I'll kill your cat. I'll kill your dog. I'll kill myself, 8-year-old girl. And when I die, I'm going to write a note that says it was your fault. You may say good riddance to the guy, but imagine being 8 years old knowing you're responsible for an adult's death. Maybe a family member. Maybe somebody who everyone knows. I'll kill myself. What did your dad say he would do if anyone ever touched you? Oh, he said he'd kill him. I believe your dad's a truth teller. So if you go home and tell your dad, he's going to come over and kill me. That'll be your fault. You know what they do to guys who kill people? They put them in jail for life. That'll be your fault. You know what? And I wonder if social services wonder why your mom was hanging out with a murderer and a perpetrator. They'll probably put you in foster care. So 10-year-old boy, when you go home tonight and think about telling, let me make it clear to you, I'm dead. That's your fault. Your dad's in prison the rest of his life. That's your fault. And they'll put you in foster care. Enjoy your life. I didn't have to hurt him. I just had to threaten him. God told the kids, if you tell, I'll get to you before the police do, because I'll know. I have people watching you all the time. Tonight, I'm going to let you see some of them. When you go home, the first hour you get home, you look out your front window. The guys who drive by in blue cars, they're all my men. And they're watching you. Any blue cars ever drive by your house? This kid thought he was being watched. He couldn't tell. We forget as adults how easy it is to trick kids. And how to threaten. They put them in these double bonds. I'm caught between a rock and a hard place. If I do this, this bad thing happens. It can be homosexuality. Like I said, boys may get aroused. You like that. If you tell, I'll tell all your friends you're gay. You may not know what gay means as a little kid. But you know, some people like them and some don't. I don't know what to do. I can't tell them. I'm stuck. Girl comes out of a lacrosse game. I give her a hug, good job, way to score. Next time she scores, by accident as I'm going in to hug her, my hand hits her rear end. It happens when you're hugging sometimes. Good job, you scored. Next time she comes from scoring and comes out of the game, I go in to hug her and my hand hits the side of her breast. Good job, you scored. 2 weeks later, I'm working with her one-on-one. Because I've told her parents I can get her that Division I scholarship. I only had a little alone time with her. I start to touch her. She says, Coach, what are you doing? I said, what am I doing? What are you, some kind of tease? When I grabbed your breast when you scored that goal against Sweet Ridge, I didn't see it pull back. When you scored that goal against Columbine, I grabbed your butt, you sure seemed to like it. And she remembers those touches. And she thought, I thought they were accident, but maybe, yeah, we've been doing this for weeks. What do you mean? Go ahead and tell. I'll tell everyone what you've been doing already. As an adult, ridiculous. As a child, I'm trapped. We had a 6-year-old boy, I think it was 6 and 3, came in. First thing he said in the interview is, am I in trouble? No, you're not in trouble. What had happened is, his babysitter had said, if you're good, I'll let you watch any TV show you want that your parents don't let you watch. And they were good the whole night, and they let him watch some show that their parents wouldn't let him watch. Everything was fine. Next time he came over, same deal. Except this time, after they watched the show, he started touching. And the older kid said, I don't like this, I'm going to tell my mom and dad. He said, if you tell your mom and dad, I'll tell them you watch this show. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't watched that show. You'll get in trouble. And that kid was worried about him being in trouble. As an adult, ridiculous. As a child, not so much. And that kid thought his parents didn't want him watching that show because the guy added, it wouldn't have happened if he hadn't watched the show. He thought maybe that's why his parents didn't want him watching the show, that that's what happens. So understand, they'll figure a way to put him in there. They make them feel responsible. They make them blame. The 5-year-old who came into the interview and said, don't be mad at my dad. I wore the nightgown that made him horny. She knows exactly who's to blame. She wore the nightgown. Not her dad, her. The coach who said to the girl, if you weren't so beautiful, this wouldn't be happening. Her fault. She should have made herself uglier. They know who to blame, and because they blame themselves, they don't talk about it. They put them in those hard places, they make them blame, and the longer you don't talk about it, the harder it is. Because what do we say to a kid who 2 years later says something happened, and nobody means anything bad by this, but understand how it sounds to the victim. Why didn't you tell? Now parents mean that, meaning, why didn't you tell? I would have helped you. I'd have done anything I could. But what they hear is an accusation. Why didn't you tell? Even though we don't mean it that way. They invoke guilt. Look what you've done to me. I will kill myself. I might go to prison. It's going to ruin my reputation. You've done that to me. Understand, they'll push them that way. And it starts small. All these things seem big, but understand it often starts small, and that's why we say you have rules and you enforce them. Because I may not start big. Maybe she tells her kids they can't have snacks between meals. And I'm going to give her kid a snack. And I'm going to see if her kid tells or not. If he doesn't tell, I think, good, I got a secret keeper. I'm going to try some more secrets and build up. But if he does tell, and she says to me, I told you I don't let my kid have snacks. She gives, well, I grew up that way. I didn't think it was a big deal. And does it seem like a big deal? No. But I push one of your boundaries. And if you don't confront me and I know you know about it, I'm going to push your boundaries a little bit more. I'm going to see how far I can get. It can come with touching, with secrets, sexual jokes. Adults do not need to tell kids sexual jokes or make sexual innuendo. And it happens, we see this a lot with coaches and teachers with teens. They do it, perpetrators do it, because if they can get kids talking about sex, then they can take advantage of that and use it against them. But there's no reason. Kids tell sexual jokes to learn about sex, but they tell them among themselves, and it's a way of testing, like, oh, do I know this, do I not know this? They don't need adults telling them those kinds of jokes. The compliant victim, and we mean nothing bad by this, this is the victim who doesn't see themselves as a victim. I'm in love. How? I'm 13, he's 50, but we are in love. How can that be a crime? I'm not going to tell if I don't see that. It's the 5-year-old who doesn't understand what's being done. We had a 5-year-old who described being molested in great detail, but called it the parent game and wasn't upset by it at all. The game she didn't like was the game with the tweezers. You had to reach in and try to pull out this guy's bones and things. It was the game Operation, because she wasn't good at it, and his nose blinked every time. But the parent game didn't really bother. It wasn't her favorite game. So they may not see themselves as victims because they don't know, or they're in love. Teens especially, it can feel good. I was popular in 6th grade. I went to 7th grade. Everyone else developed. I got acne. I'm sitting at a lunch table alone, and some adult tells me I'm beautiful, I'm mature, I'm special. I can feel so good. I can like the attention. And we've got to remember, teens are dumb. Their frontal lobes have not connected. They are not smart in the ways of the world. They may know algebra way better than we'll ever know it, but they're not smart in the ways of the world. They're naive. And so we even have police say, you really think this girl left with 3 guys she didn't know their last name and didn't think anything would happen? Yeah, they were at a high school party. They were high school guys. They're not molesters. Guys my age are molesters. You think she met this guy online and went to coffee with him and didn't think something would happen? Yeah, he's a 30-year-old good-looking guy. And she's 14. She doesn't think that's the guy who's going to hurt her. So yeah, they may do that. So what can you guys do as an organization? You can do everything you can and understand something bad could still happen, and it wouldn't be your fault. What you're trying to do is make it an environment where they don't want to come, or if something does happen, you identify it quickly. Why do you care about that? Because you care about kids and families. That's the main reason. You don't want to see any of your families or children who come to your church hurt. Organization staff. We do this after things have happened, and often it tears organizations apart. They point to each other. You say, didn't you hang out with him a lot? I wonder if you didn't see anything. And aren't you guys supposed to set the rules for the agency? We didn't have very good rules. It must be your fault. Everyone starts pointing fingers, except that the one person the finger should be pointed at, the guy who did it. But we'll start blaming, and you'll blame yourself. I worked with this guy. How didn't I see that? We'll all go around feeling guilty. It can ruin the reputation of the organization if it's not handled right. I wonder about that church. I wonder if maybe that's one of those cultish churches and they're all doing something to kids. The way you handle it right is saying, we had somebody hurt somebody in our church. We're going to relook at our rules and make sure every rule we have helps make sure this didn't happen again. When we found out, we reported immediately. We supported the victim. We did everything we needed to do. And we are going to continue trying to learn and stand up against it. People can understand that. It's when we start hiding that it always goes worse. And financially, you're going to get sued. They're going to sue you no matter what you do. But if you can show you had good rules and you had training and you've tried to put things in place, usually it becomes not as successful. Why is it important to have rules? Why it's important to have rules. If you don't have the culture, your rules are nothing but a piece of paper. And we've seen, I've looked at the rules of agencies that had child molestation, and many of them had great rules, but nobody enforced any of them. It was a piece of paper. It wasn't who we are. And that's why you set your culture. And this top one needs to be your church's number one thing. Child safety has to be your priority. There's not one parent who sends their kid to this church and thinks they're coming out worse at the end of the day. In fact, I'd say the opposite is the expectation, that they think they're coming out better. There's not one kid who walks to church and thinks, I'm going to get hurt today. It has to be your number one expectation. You have to set that expectation with staff and volunteers and the entire community. Our expectation is that kids will be safe here. We're going to put rules in place that will help ensure that. And we expect not only our staff and volunteers to follow it, we hope as a whole community you would respect that. So if we ever have to correct you for something, you'll accept it in the way it's coming, which is we're following our priority. That you'll give appropriate training, this kind of training, so you understand about what perpetrators are going to do so you're more able to handle it. Training around how you make reports, training around how what your rules are in the daycare part in Sunday school, that you train on all those things, and more than once. They use And I point out this training because we often forget how important it is. I coach high school girls lacrosse, and I know now, 10 years ago, I was putting girls into games with concussions because I wasn't trained. I could go seasons without having a girl get a concussion. Since I've been trained, I've not had a season go by where we haven't had a girl have a concussion and have to sit out for 4, 5, 6 weeks. But I didn't know, I wasn't trained, and it wasn't that I was trying to be a bad coach, I just didn't know better. So that's why training is so important. Supervision. If you're the one in charge of the kids program, then it's more than sitting in your office and filling out forms. It's walking through the program. It's listening, it's seeing how people are treating kids. It's dropping in unexpected. My staff makes fun of me because sometimes they catch me just sitting in the hallway. I'm listening to how they talk to police, families, how they interact with kids. It gives me a feel of how we are as an agency. And yes, I have plenty of work I can do, but sometimes that's my job. I'm supposed to make sure they're doing their job. So sometimes it's just sitting and listening. That reporting is encouraged. We often say, here's how you report, but we don't encourage it. We want to say, we report, you tell us about boundaries, you tell us about violations, you tell us about abuse, and the way we react when things are reported will let people know how we feel. I ran a residential treatment center. When I would get a call initially at 2 or 3 in the morning when something went bad, my initial reaction was often, oh, really? Okay, I guess I'll get dressed and come on in, thanks. Now I was just bummed that something happened and that I had to get up. I wasn't mad at that staff, but you don't think it made that staff hesitant to call me? They're like, maybe I shouldn't have called on this one. Don seems pretty upset. You know, maybe this isn't a big enough deal. When I got smarter and someone mentored me, I answered that call differently. Thanks. Oh, that is great. I am so glad you called. I'll be right in. Thanks a lot. You're great. Then I could put the phone down and throw my little tizzy fit, throw things around the room, be mad I got up. But I don't want that staff to feel unencouraged. And often we do it not because we really don't want reporting, just because we're upset ourselves. We're like, I can't believe one of our staff did this, and maybe the kids are, we're thinking all that. We can't do it, we have to overcome it. So initially we're like, thank you for reporting, you're a great person. And it applies to everybody in the building. Churches have to go above and beyond that, unfortunately. You want to create an atmosphere of welcome, trust, and safety. Because kids will only tell if they feel safe. That's when they talk about if they can feel safe. And if your church can make people feel welcome, that they can feel trusted, that you're going to take care of me here, that I'm safe, no matter what goes on and what I tell you, you're going to treat that respectfully and you're going to keep me safe, then I'm going to feel welcome. And not only for kids, but for adult victims who are recovering. If they walk in and say, this is a safe place for somebody who had a childhood like me, I want to be here. I can heal here. But you're going to always put the victim over the perpetrator. That doesn't mean you make a decision about who's guilty and who's not. But when you get that report, you say to the person, we've had this report, police have said you need to be out of the church until they finish investigating. You can't be out. We're supporting the victim right now. We're not making the decision of who's right, who's wrong. We're just going down the middle, and we have to protect. And protecting means you can't be here for a little bit. You're going to let the process go. And once the process is done, if that person is found to be the perpetrator, then there is no, what did she do to entice you? What did he do? There is no partial blame. Well, you know, we told you shouldn't have met with the youth minister on your own ever. Because suddenly, you've put some of the responsibility back on the kid. And I don't care if that kid came naked to youth class every single night alone. The adult is the one who's responsible. Kids do stupid things. I told my kids, I have 4 of my 5 kids are girls. I said, if you run through Central Park, New York, naked, at 2 in the morning, and someone jumps out of a bush at you and rapes you, you know whose fault it is? The guy who made the choice to jump out of the bush. We will talk about how stupid you were, because you were incredibly stupid and put yourself at risk. But that doesn't mean you have one bit of blame. talk about how you should run during the day, wear clothes, and run with a group. But understand, one person owns it, the person who hurt you. It's the same thing here. And are you talking about sexual abuse to your congregation? Both for adults and kids. And you don't have to get graphic like we've gotten today. You can do it in other ways about talking about abuse in general, that your church won't tolerate it, that you welcome people, that if somebody does need to talk about it, you can listen to it, that you'll support somebody. There are ways to talk about it. You can say it's never right for an adult to hurt a child. That's a powerful message, and often we never say that. If you can look at those figures, it could mean up to 20% of the people sitting in your congregation every week were molested as a child. If 20% of your congregation had cancer, you would be talking about cancer. And I will guarantee it's going to be close to 20%. So you can figure ways of talking about it without being graphic that are still supportive. Because abuse thrives in silence. They make kids feel guilt. They make all of us, we don't want to talk about this, and that's how it gets done. If you leave here and get hit on Alameda going home today, you'll come back next week and say, you're not going to believe it, someone rear ended you. If you're sexually abused, you sit in silence. What can you do? You can start by remembering there is not a constitutional right to work with kids. If somebody doesn't feel right with you, you don't have to have them work with kids. You can say, we're going to have you do something else. No right. You have an application for both staff and volunteers. You do background checks, and you don't let them work with kids till they've had the background check done. We had a group in Lakewood who hired a guy. 6 months later, they got around to doing his background check. By then, he'd molested 3 kids. When they did his background check, he was a convicted sex offender out of Texas. They'd have done his background, they'd have saved those kids. The police said, why did you apply? You didn't know they were going to do it. He said, I figured if they hired me, they didn't do their background checks. I was in. What did I have to lose? So don't think just because you say there's a background check, you won't get people who are guilty of lying. They'll give it a shot. What do they have to lose? You check references, 1 or 2 references. You may not find out anything because they're going to give you people who they think will say good things. But you can say that reference. Would you trust this person around your kids? Around any kids? Do you think he could ever hurt a child? Do you think they would tell if somebody was being hurt? Even though you may get the perfect answers for hiring, that person may go back to that person and say, that church called, they ask so many questions about kids and keeping kids safe. And if I'm a perpetrator, I may say, that's not the one I want to go to. They're looking into this a little too much. You have interview questions. What would you do if you thought someone was hurting a kid here at the church? What would you do if somebody told you not to report? You can ask all sorts of questions just to see how they're going to react. They may have the wrong answers, but you're sending that message to them. You can check their social media. Most HR departments believe this is okay. You should always check with your HR. But you go on their website or their Facebook, you may not see that they say, I heard kids on there. But one church went on, this guy had nothing but pictures of young kids and talked about how beautiful they were. That was all on his Facebook, and none of them were related to him. That's going to give me a warning. Why is that person? That is not normal. Doesn't mean he's a perpetrator, but it may be somebody your guard goes up and said, this may not be somebody we need with our church. And then, before you bring him in, and we do this at Ralston House, and we not only do background checks, all my staff and volunteers have to fill out a 20-page personal history questionnaire that is very invasive, very personal, and then we're polygraphed. I was polygraphed for 3.5 hours by the RPAD PD on it. And I thought they were going to arrest me, and I passed. And even with that, we end by saying, if you come to work here, know we are nuts about keeping kids safe. If you violate our boundary rules, we are going to correct you. And if that doesn't work for you, don't come to work here. No hard feelings. But you'll be miserable otherwise because we're going to hold you to it. So what can you do? Set boundaries. That's the way, when you have boundaries, perpetrators have to violate them to get to a kid. So if you have good boundaries, you can start to identify what's going on. You have a job description. If I'm the janitor, I'm not doing one-on-one pastoral counseling. I'm the janitor. If I'm the Sunday school teacher, then that's what I do. You have the job description written out. One-on-one time. In churches, there are going to be, do you need one-on-one time in Sunday school? Probably not. Ministers are going to need to minister and do counseling one-on-one. That makes sense. But even as that, could it be observed and could it be interrupted? Is it in a room with a window? Is it at a time when other people are in the church? So make it, if you're having it, is it observable and interruptible? And again, that doesn't mean I don't correct a kid who's having a hard day in youth group or Sunday school. The group can be here. I can take 10 steps here and correct them one-on-one. It seems like you're having a hard day. What should we do about that? I don't have to yell in front of the class. I can take, but I'm observable and I'm interruptible. Physical contact. Kids need physical contact. I'm not, if you think I'm telling you never to touch a kid, that's not what I'm saying. And if you made that your rule here, no one ever touches a kid, everyone would violate it. You'd never be able to tell somebody who's doing something wrong. But what's appropriate? A 2-year-old who's fallen down and hit themselves, you may pick up in your lap and sit in your lap with them. But a 16-year-old girl, do I need to have her sit in my lap? No. You have rules that are meant for physical contact for their age and their appropriateness. On our girls lacrosse team, we say there are no frontal hugs. We say we do side hugs, we do fist bumps, high fives, hit the goalie on the helmet. We say if we position kids, we will put our hands on their shoulder and move them into a position. We won't grab them by the waist. I won't hold a girl like this in front of me and show her how to throw a lacrosse ball. We have rules that fit for our sport. It's going to be different. Swimming, I'm probably going to have my hands just like this under kids. That's how you hold them up. But that's appropriate. So you make rules that are reasonable and appropriate. You don't have personal, private, confidential conversations. If you're part of the counseling team or the pastoral team, you will have that. But even they generally will say, we can talk among ourselves to help figure things out, to share what's going on. But you don't want Sunday school staff saying, this is just between me and you, I won't tell anyone else. No, you want to share that with, if there's a problem with the kid, you want to share it with the supervisor. And you can share that thing. Favoritism works both ways. I can give kids a lot of good things and say, if you want to keep getting this, here's what you need to do. And maybe that'll work. Or, I treat her horribly. I don't give her anything, and I treat you two perfect. You get everything, every privilege, everything. And I treat her as awful as I can. And then one day I say to her, would you like what they're getting? Because let me tell you what they do for me. And she thinks they're doing that for me, and she wants that. She would like that, and she doesn't. And then later when she tells, she says, well, those two girls were doing it too. They go to them and they say, we never did anything. What's she talking about? Liar. So it can work both ways. Of course you have favorites. You just treat people equally. You don't favor them in public. Relationships outside role goes back to job description. If you're a Sunday school teacher here, that's what they've said you'll do. And the church has said you can be trusted while you're teaching Sunday school. They have not said you're a good babysitter at night. And you need to let your parishioners know that. That we're telling you, any of the people we have in our classrooms, we've done background checks, we have rules here in place that will help keep them safe with your kids, but we've not said one of them is great with your kids away from you. We had a church sue and get sued and lost over this. They had a 16-year-old boy who was working with their youth groups, never heard a kid at the church. Parents asked him if he could babysit at night. He would babysit because he's so good with the kids. He molested the kids at night. Parents ended up suing and saying, you didn't say he wasn't safe to have babysitting. And our assumption was you wouldn't have somebody like that with the church. But all the church really had said, in my opinion, I think it was a wrong way. The church was basically saying, while they're here, we have rules in place that will keep your kids safe. But I am not guaranteeing this kid outside the church. We can't. Sexual conversation jokes, we've already talked about that. Gives financial help. Of course you will want to help people here who are financially struggling. Maybe you have an old coat, you see a kid who's coming in the winter and it's cold and never has a coat, and this coat will fit him. But instead of you giving it to them, give it to the church and say, would you give this coat to little Johnny? I noticed little Johnny doesn't have a coat. Because then it comes from the church, not from you. And perpetrators will often try to get kids and families to owe them. And if you really care about little Johnny, you don't need that pat on the back from him. You know whether you did well or not. So give it to the church, because then the church can't molest him. And they don't, and nobody minds owing the church. But you, that John Candaria, the guy who I told you about, he's a perfect example in so many ways. All the churches he went to mega churches, where there were 400 or 500 cars every weekend. And he was a mechanic. And he said, I knew somebody's car would. You have that many cars in the parking lot, someone's not going to work eventually. And I would fix it for free. People talked about that he would buy the parts and do all the labor completely for free. People say, let me pay you for that, John. No, just do my good Christian duty. But he said, let me do something for you. Oh, invite me over for dinner sometime. Because he knew when they brought him into his house, those parents had given him the good seal of approval. My kids will tell you I don't bring anybody bad into our house. And so that's what he wanted to be owed. So then he could say to the kids, I fixed your parents' car. I fixed your car. Can I take your kid camping with me this weekend? Can he come over? Photos, videos. We don't see this really in churches. We see this more at dance studios and rec centers. But where somebody's standing under the slide taking pictures of all the kids' rear ends as they walk up the slide, or the dad who has his phone out every time there's a quick change at the dance studio. You have a complete right to tell some people they can't use their phones, they can't take pictures in your facility. There is no constitutional right to use your phone in here. You have a right to say that if you want. We've not ever seen this in churches. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but understand you can set the boundaries around that. And remember, you need to have positive examples always. You can't say never touch a kid, because it won't work. You have to say, here's how you touch kids. Here. Kid falls down, yes, you're going to offer them a hand and help them up. If they're 2, you might give them a hug. If they're 16, you might pat them on the back. Whatever it is. A family suffering, they don't have food or money. Yes, the church has a way of addressing that. Give us money, we'll make sure it goes to them. We'll make sure your clothing or food donation goes to families who need it. All of these have to have positive ways, because you can't just say no. Make sure you have clear boundaries. You can't say sort of don't touch, or it has to be clear so you can see when someone steps over it. Don't tolerate minor violations. That doesn't mean you fire the person. Oh, you broke our rules once, you're gone. It means you address it. We said no one-on-one. You had a kid out in the hallway, you probably forgot. But let's make it clear, we never take kids out in the hallway to talk to them. We wait, you do it in the classroom. If you need to get them alone and you think it, then you bring another adult, so 2 of you. You explain it, but you don't ignore it. Because ignoring it makes me think I can do it more. And if you ignore her, then you might ignore her, and she's the one who's doing something bad. So you address it, you document them all, because again, you may not see the pattern. So you write down, she violated the one-on-one rule on June 10th. If it never happens again, great. You don't ever have to look at it. But what we see again when we go to groups after this happened, she saw her violated once, you saw it twice, you saw it once, you saw it, and we have 15, 20 violations. Nobody ever wrote it down, nobody reported it, but afterwards you see the pattern very clear. Yes, and again, you supervise. You address those things, you listen, you watch, and know that perpetrators will test the boundaries. They're going to see, are you really going to say something? Am I going to build such a relationship you'll be embarrassed if you say something? They're going to try to get you to break the boundaries. I know they say we can't do one-on-one time, but you know how bad she needs some counseling. So you meet with her, I'll meet with him. And then if you're doing it for a good reason, and you start to suspect me, it'll be hard for you to turn me in, because you've been breaking the rule already. And if I can get you all to break the rules, then you won't spot me, because everybody's a little over the line, and so am I. We all look the same. That's why you hold your boundaries and address them. Communication. The main thing we say here is make sure that when somebody's communicating directly with kids, that other people have access to it. So texting, we used to say don't text because it was so secretive. There's no way you can talk to teens without texting now. So on our lacrosse team, we tell parents, give us your number, you'll get the same text your kids get. That's an easy way to do it. If your kid's getting text from us and you're not, you need to start asking questions. Facebook page, web page, make sure first off that somebody else, more than one person has the passwords. We had a coach set up a Facebook page for his team. The front looked great, team pictures, scores, all that kind of stuff. But certain kids, he gave a way of getting into a back part of that other people couldn't get, and it was a whole different message on that page. But no parent or other coach had the access to that, so they didn't know that was going on. So when their kids are on the computer, they say, I'm just looking at the pictures on my sports team, and they were looking at completely different things. So, and that's how you can include another staff, even if the parents don't want to do it, you can say to your youth ministers, if you're going to text a kid, you will always copy one staff on it. And that way, if you hear there was a text went out and you didn't get it, you can start addressing it. It's how we will address it. It's how you will notice things. Physical environment, you're not going to build a new church, but you should identify the areas where you never want a kid. If there's some corner where nobody can ever see or nobody will be able to hear, then you say, our rule is no kid ever is in this area. That you don't take kids in here. That only if two adults will they ever be in this particular room. Because it's just too dangerous a room. You can put, you may not be able to fill a whole new church, but you can put windows like you have in the doors there where somebody can see in here. That's an expense you can afford as opposed to saying, oh, we got to build a whole new building. Reporting. Some of you, if you're a minister, you're a mandatory reporter. But we say, I've just spent all this time telling you why kids don't talk about it. We believe every adult needs to report. It's your moral responsibility. I don't care whether it's legal or not. What do you want to report? Abuse, obviously. Boundary violations. Concerning behaviors. This is you walk into a classroom and every time you walk in it feels funny. You're not going to come and say, I think Don's a perpetrator. Every time I walk in the classroom with him it feels funny. But you can mention that to a supervisor. And maybe the supervisor says, you're the fourth person who said that to me. I will pay more attention. Or they say, you're the first person. I've never heard that. I'll mark it down and keep my eyes open, but I haven't heard anything else. What we know, the reason we say this is important, is we know now with brain imaging, the primitive part of your brain that made you run from wild animals when we were living in caves reacts quicker to danger than this intelligent part. And it lights up. They can literally show pictures with hidden dangers in them and have somebody in a brain scanner, and that primitive part of your brain will light up, and this part will be dull. So you get gut feelings because your brain is telling you something. And it can be wrong, so that's why you're not going to make an accusation, but you shouldn't ignore it. I tell this story, my daughter, Katie's now 33, when she was 3 years old, we went to the place I was working in. I'm here, my wife's there, Guy greets us. Katie was a hugger, she went and hugged the kid, Guy. 2 seconds, a half second. Nothing, he didn't fondle her, we were standing right there. She hugged him, let go, we leave. 15 minutes later from her car seat, she said, I don't want to hug that guy. We say, what guy? The guy at work. I said, great, you don't have to hug him, you probably won't see him again. Never thought any more about it until 6 months later he was accused and later convicted of child sex assault. I don't believe she's psychic or anything like that. I think some part of her primitive brain went off. And kids tend to pay more attention. That's why they don't want to jump into a pool a lot. Adults, we can convince ourselves, kids are like, that, I could drown in there. I'm not jumping right in. So a lot of times their primitive part goes off better than ours, and we tend to ignore ours. And report in a timely manner. Don't think about it for 3 days, because stuff can still be going on the next 3 days. Trust your intuition. And then if you get an outcry, and again, we tell this to churches, if you're working with kids and you're safe, you're the place they tell us they may outcry to. You don't have to be smart. Just do some simple things. Listen, I don't want to go home tonight, I'm afraid. That's all you need. You can make a report on that. I don't like my dad when he's home on the weekends. He hurts me. That's enough of a report. Observe, the kid was sad. The kid waited around after class. 2 kids were playing, in the playhouse, and one of them said to the other one, "Does your uncle ever come in and play the French kiss game with you?" And they were just playing and laughing. Believe. It will seem unbelievable because it will be somebody you trust, and you cannot believe they could do it. But no matter how unbelievable it is, believe them then. Know there are places like Rawls House where we do these investigations and we're neutral. And they'll get their day in court. Believe them even if it seems impossible. This didn't happen at Rawls House. It happened at an advocacy center in Minnesota. Kid, 5-year-old boy talks about being molested. Police are watching from the other room. Oh, great, we're going to go arrest this guy. He'll go to prison the rest of his life. But the kid says, "Oh, I forgot one more thing. While I was being molested, a giant eagle flew out of the sky, grabbed me in its talons, and flew me up in the air and held me there the whole time." Police are like, there goes our case. No jury's going to believe the kid was held in his talons. But they did what they were supposed to do, which is investigate. And they went to the guy's house where the kid had never been, supposedly, and there on his bedspread was an eagle with its talons out. When that kid was face down on that bedspread, that's what he saw, and that's where he went in his trauma. The jury said it was the most convincing piece of evidence they received. But it seemed unbelievable. Write it down. You will not be in court for a year to a year and a half. You won't remember. And you don't have to write down a lot. Kid said this. He was crying at the time. I said this. I made the report. There it is. And juries love you if you've been one because you're an outcry witness and you have no dog in this fight. So your statements often are ones that really sway juries. Thank the child. They have shared, and I've told you how hard it is, and for some reason they picked you. Thank them. Thank you for sharing this with me. Then make the report. And if your policy is you tell a supervisor who makes the report, sit in that room while the supervisor makes the report. Make sure they're doing their job. That they don't think about hiding something. Don't panic. None of that is hard. Don't question, because defense counsel will say you put something in their head. You said you didn't want to go home with your dad because he hurt you. Is he having sex with you? Defense counsel is going to say you put the idea of sex in their head. If they say they're going to be hurt, that doesn't mean they say, I don't want to go home tonight. You can say, why? And if they say, because I'm having so much fun here, that's fine. Or if they say, why? Because it's not safe at home because I hurt dad. That kind of question is, but you don't want to go any farther once you have an accusation of anything. And then don't leave the child alone. Don't say, wait here while I tell somebody. Say, can you two sit with little Mary while I go do something? Because you don't know what that child's been told. Are there blue guys going by? Is this guy going to come in and hurt her? So you don't want to leave them alone. And the other thing is, what do we do when kids are having a hard time? Go take a time out by yourself. We don't want this kid to think they've done anything. You train like you're doing today on the dynamics. You train the people who hire on your hiring policies. You train on boundaries and reporting policies. And it has to be more than once. The first day they come in as a volunteer staff, you train them to never do it again. That won't work. With lacrosse, I don't show the girls, here's how you throw a lacrosse ball. All right, we're done. We're moving on to something. We never do it again. We do it every day. Now, you're not going to do it every day, but you can train once a year on here's our reporting policies, here's our boundaries, and this is why we should have them. And why do you train? Because we become complacent. People who live in Florida will move back into their homes and think, well, probably a hurricane will here again. It's what our brain is taught to do. It's like we want to believe things will go back to normal. So you'll start to believe soon after this that kids would tell you. You'd know if something was happening here. That we could tell. I could tell if the kid was being molested. And that while it may not happen here, it could happen over at that Baptist church. But here, come on. Our brains want to do that. Finally, if after all this and your rules, something happens, I'm still going to say to you, don't blame yourself. If you screw up and do something wrong, don't blame yourself. As long as you didn't participate or become an accomplice by not telling, it is never your fault, no matter how stupid a thing you might have done. And perpetrators will want you to believe that. I'll do two things and we'll close. The marble jar I talk about, and I have two things over here. If you would like more information about Rawls House or a copy of this PowerPoint, you can sign up on here. We'd be glad to email that to you. And I'd ask that you take one of these marble packets today. Every kid who leaves Ralston House, at any of our sites, we have 3 sites, one in North Glen, one in Lakewood, one in Arvada. When they leave, we ask them to put a marble in this jar. And we say, that's so we can remember you, because every kid who comes through puts a marble in. And it's so that you remember you're not the only one. If you're sexually abused, if you're physically abused, you believe it's just you. There's something wrong in you, and this is our symbol to them that it isn't their fault, and that they're not the only one. And we ask you to take 2 marbles, keep one with yourself, to remember as an adult, you're responsible for helping keep kids safe, especially if you choose to work around kids. If you don't want that burden on your shoulders, do not work in the daycare center. Do not work in Sunday school. You either accept it or you don't. It's okay not to. But don't accept it and then don't take the responsibility for it. I mean, don't accept it and then say, oh, but I'm not responsible. And give them a marble to somebody else and say, remember there are kids out there who are being abused. If you ever hear anything, it's up to you to tell, because it's very hard for them. I want to slow down our front doors. I'd pay my staff to sit on their hands. Or if we have to increase our front doors to save more kids, I'm fine with that too. But I don't want these kids to continue to be hurt. I'll end with the story that I always end every speaking engagement with, because if you think you'll report no problem, you're wrong. It will be miserable. You will have gut balls, you will feel sick to your stomach, you will doubt yourself, you'll wonder about ruining someone's life, career, job, whatever it is. I guarantee I've had to make reports, and I work in this field, I have them. When Sandusky did his stuff, I listened to sports radio 24/7 because I wanted to hear people's reactions, and so many of them I would have told right away, I did this, and I thought you wouldn't. I've seen good people not report. So if you think about not reporting, think about this little girl. I have something that I keep that helps. When I have to make a hard decision, I tend to want to wimp out, and I put this out so I remember, and then I think, all right, I can make the decision that's right as opposed to the one I want to go with. 5 years old, her dad is walking through a park here in Lakewood. A little girl in the park, it's snowing, she's trying to zip up her jacket. He goes over to help her, and as perpetrators sometimes do, he reacts and he grabs her without planning anything, and she screams. And people in the park come running, and he takes off running. Literally, the Lakewood PD followed his footprints in the snow to his front door. When they went to his house, they found out he had a 5-year-old daughter. They brought her in to be interviewed at Ralston House. And Linda, our interviewer, was the one who did it that day, and I don't get to watch a lot of interviews, but I got to watch this one, and the little girl started the interview by saying, Linda said, hi, I'm someone who talks to kids, and the girl said, can I tell you anything? Linda said, yeah, even the bad things. She said, anything you want to tell me, you can tell me. For 2 hours, this girl told a horror story of her life, of what had gone on with her. And when she finished, Linda was wrapping up, and the police typed in, we have a teleprompter in case our interviewers get wrapped up and forget a question, and they typed in friends. And Linda knew that meant find out what friends she has. If he's doing this to his daughter, he grabbed a girl in the park, maybe he's done something to her friends. So she says, tell me who your friends are, who lives in the neighborhood, and she says, so do you have your friends over your house? And this little girl literally does a double take. No, I never invite my friends into my house. I don't want my dad to hurt. At 5 years old, she was protecting every other kid in her neighborhood. If you think about not reporting, think about her. I guarantee by 5 somebody saw something. And they thought, she's brave enough, you can be brave enough. Be as brave as a 5-year-old to make that report. Know there are places like us, our best days are when we find out something didn't happen. That's great. And there are mistakes where a kid says something and somebody's misinterpreted. That's great. But understand, it will feel horrible, and it's up to us as adults to protect. I always like to say that girl was put in a foster adopt home. They ended up adopting her, and the last we heard from her, she was doing great. I never doubted you have something like that inside you. I always think you're going to come out the other side of things. I appreciate your time here. I'd answer any questions you have afterwards. I know this is a miserable 2 hours. I always joke that I don't tell people what I do, because then they don't want to talk to me. And I get that. So, again, I thank you for your church having us out, because this is a safe place for kids. and they need these places. And I will tell you from adult victims, their spirituality is one of the things that helps them heal. And the victims who have a spiritual belief, who belong to a church, get better quicker and go on to do, it's easier for them to heal. And that's just a fact. Whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, that's just statistical fact. And so we value churches that are willing to protect kids and spread the word around. So I thank you all for taking this time. I'd answer any questions you have, otherwise, thank you again for coming out.
Does anybody have any questions they want to ask?
Well, again, thank you very much for what you all do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.